Okay, so now we have a very basic application, as you can see in here, that runs like a simple Express application, as we started in here. And that application also has a front-end folder that we haven't used yet. And I also installed NodeMon, so I can just run things and restart without problems, okay? So now let's start combining this with the backend, with the front end that we created in there. So if you come in here in the getting started, these are the different steps that you need to do, how to install it, like you need to do an npm init. We didn't need to do that because we have the package.json in here. You have to go and say what is the entry point in your, oh yes, this is like just for the initialization, and then just to import Express, so we are doing that as well, okay? The next thing is the hello world. We did that so that it's already working. You can use Express generator, which is a library, but it's very unfortunate because the problem is that it generates code that it's not ESM, but we can change that in a minute, but we were going to skip that for the moment. And let's go and see like the basics of routing. So things start getting a little bit complicated in here, but bear with me, you can survive what we are going to do. Like one of the basic things is that here in the backend, we can go and start creating different endpoints, okay? So if, for instance, I come in here and then I say I want to have an API, then you can go and create like your usual, come on, be quiet, Copilot for a second. Here is going to be our usual just event handler, or in this case is like an endpoint handler or something. And then what I want to do is that I can send, for instance, some JSON, and then in that JSON I'm going to say the data is going to be, so for instance, I can come in here and create some listings. And beautiful, yes, thank you Copilot, that it's useful, not very diverse, but let's go with that. And then I'm going to say that I'm going to have these listings or something. And then I can just go and put my listings in here. So basically, I have a global variable that contains a list of listings. And then I created a new URL, like a new endpoint, is what I call a data endpoint. I'm going to call that API, because that way it will going to be easier for us to identify what we're doing there. So now I have here the Hola Mundo, which is the default. But if in the server I go to API listings, then I can get the data for that, okay? This is important, and we're going to see why in a second. But the problem is that, what about this front-end thing? So if you want to see that, because remember we had the about page and the index, so that is not available anymore. So even if I come and write the whole thing, it still doesn't work. I think even this one shouldn't work. So even if I do that, that shouldn't work because Node hasn't been exposing that. So if you keep on seeing the documentation for Express, it's not even Node, it's Express. Then you can see you can also serve static pages. And then for that, you do something like Express static. And then what is your root and what are the options that you want to use? So in this case, we can go and add something like this. So for that, and we want to have that before all of the other roots that we have. So we can go and say, this is going to be my front end. No, Copilot, I'm not building anything. This name is exactly this same name. And then since I have that now, I am not going to have this anymore. I still can have the other one, which is the listings. And then when I come in here, basically if I refresh this and then I remove this URL and then just go here, now what's happening is that Express, it's serving this front end that contains our basic HTML page, okay? But if I go into my API listings, it gets that data. So it's kind of like doing the best of the two worlds. And then if you want to get and load, like for instance, those listings that I was loading in there, if I want to load that in here, I could add, for instance, like Yes, so let's go and do another one of these, and I'm going to say fetch listings. Yes, you are right. And this is going to be an asynchronous function, and we have to talk more about asynchronous functions, but bear with me for a second. Okay, Copilot, that's kind of following the thing. Let me actually shoot it down for the moment, just for explaining this. So basically what I want to do is that I want to do a fetch, okay, of the /API listings, which is this backend that I have in here, okay, or like endpoint that I have in here. And then when you get that, and I want to get a response for that, and I want to wait for that, because the problem is that this is going to be an asynchronous function, which means it is not going to wait until it has the response. It is going to trigger, it's going to schedule the fetching, and it's going to wait until it gets it. And when it gets it, it's going to trigger an event handler. But if you just use an await, this is not going to continue until that happens. That's why this has to be async, because you can only use await inside an asynchronous method, okay? Now, once you do that, you want to check if this thing is okay. So if this is not okay, then you should go and, for the moment, I'm just going to do console error. I think it's error, like, or maybe error only, and then error loading listings, okay? So for the moment, let's do it like that, and then return or something. So very common, like pattern, you try something, and if it doesn't work, then you just stop the execution, but you only look at the negative cases, so that way you stop execution. I don't know if it makes sense. If I do it in the positive way, then I have to start nesting things, because the next thing I need to do is that I need to get the listings, and I can get those listings by converting that response that I got in here. This is going to get me an HTTP response, and now that I know that the response was correct, I can try to convert it into a JSON. This is also going to be a promise, and since it is a promise, I can do an await, and then I can just go and put in here something that says console log listings, and then show the listings, something like that. And then the only thing I'm missing then it's to fetch the listings. When I call this is actually going to be asynchronous, and it is going to wait until it gets the results and does that. So let's go and see if this is working at all. If I do this and then I open that, then you can say that it's fetching the listings, and then it got that thing. So for instance, in this case, this is going to be listings.data. And now you can see that I'm getting the listings. Does that make sense? So now, in this case, this is going to be very basic, but just it's like a starting point for Node.js. What we did is that we created a very basic Node.js application. That Node.js application has a bunch of, so actually we can start organizing this like that as well. So let me put, for instance, this into a new folder in here that I'm going to call routes. And then in these routes, I'm going to call them like an index JavaScript, or you can also call it routes JavaScript. And then I'm going to create this thing in here, and I forgot, let me go to see, I don't have the example in here, so let me generate a very basic thing with this, so I can copy the idea for this. So let me come in here and then just use this one, and I'm going to create express generator. Do I want to install it? Yes, and then perfect, beautiful. So I just want to see this part, and then this is the code that is regenerated by Express Generator. So it imports Express again, and it just creates Express Router. That's the part I was forgetting. So let me do that same thing. I just import express from express, and then I do a router, which is going to be an express.router, and then that router is the one that I use for creating this thing in here. And I think I can just do export default that router. Let me see what this thing did in here. We don't need any copilot. Yes, this is the classical way of exporting that. And then in the other one, you import that one and you do an app.use. So in here, in my backend JS, I can import my, yes, let me say main routes from, and then Copilot just woke up. No, Babel. No, it's from routes.index.js. And then after loading this thing, I'm going to say, please use the main routes. And we are going to be using that here on the slash, as you can see here. The other one you can do in there, later we're going to see, I could just go and say, all of the backend, I like putting them into a different URL so I don't get confused, are going to be into the API. And if you do it like that, then you only need to put it like this, and then still is going to be like that. Like it still is going to be /API/listings. And if I go and I refresh this, that works. And if you take a look in here, form loaded. Oh, I think it's having problems finding the other one. So this is good because now I can go here into my front end. And here in the listings, the other one you want to do whenever you're doing something like this is to try and then try to see if this is going to generate any errors. And there we go. Yes, what's your problem? That seems about right to me. And then I want to catch an error. Then you show console log error loading listings, and then something like that. Would that work? Let me change this for just log for the moment, just in case. Initialized, and then fetching listings. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. That's why it's not working. There we go. So this one in here, it is working. Let me actually make a mistake in here. See if this will fail. Beautiful. So yes, I got an error loading listings in here. Okay. So this is just a very basic application. I strongly recommend you go and try to replicate all of these steps. I know it's a lot to digest, but then in the next class, we're going again to start from scratch, maybe using Express Generator and try to start creating like the basics on how we are going to be using for creating our next project. So please let me know if there are any questions you may have. The other things you can start doing, it's again, as I told you before, try loading that JSON that we had in here, but try serving that JSON directly from the backend. Pass it to the front end, and then use that front end for rendering everything, okay? Let me just go and commit this in here. Status, I'm going to add the backend in there, and backend and the routes. And then I'm going to say git commit adding express basics. And then I'm going to add, what else do I have in there? Git status. Good. I'm going to just then commit, and let me see. I'm installed, yes, in the Node Express. So I'm going to, I guess, I did the commit for everything. So I can just git push, which should send it. Let's actually do it explicitly to Node Express. And then now we have a new branch. If you go into, and that's why it wasn't showing before. Here, this demo page, Airbnb. Now you can see that we have a new branch where I just started putting all of that has that. We will have to update the README and all of that. So please go and practice a lot of this. I know it's a lot of data, and a lot of information, but practice makes the master. So try it and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.